Thank you, McKeel. And again, I've actually been here a few times in the past 20 years to this executive summit, and it's great to be back. So can I have my slides up here as we shift? It's so fun to this screen. Isn't this amazing, this screen? So I've been having fun with my design team to play around with this thing. And I'm going to be talking, as he mentioned, about the future of the sharing economy. He asked me to do that in Chicago, and since then it's thought, make it a little bigger. Think about the future of the platform economy. And actually, inspired by Esko there, too, I'm actually going to take it another notch up because I think there is a very, very big thing going on here that I think people really have to wrap their heads around very quickly. Now, one of the things, McKeel had already kind of set it up here, but I did start at Wired. I'm working at Reinvent here, so he's taken most of my intro, but I wanted to say, why would you want to listen to me? One of the reasons is this What's Now San Francisco, which I do with Capgemini here. Every month we take a different, really top thought leader in a different field, and we have them explain what's going on in their field to other people outside their field. And over the course of the last, it's now close to 2 years, we have connected up an amazing network of networks in the Bay Area that is really starting to think very fundamentally about what's going on around us. And so partly when I talk to you, it's not just Pete Leyden's kind of staring at the ceiling. I'm actually trying to synthesize a lot of what's going on in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area right now. And there is a really ratcheting up kind of anxiety about what's actually we're facing here. We also now just expanded to New York, and we're doing the same thing in New York. So I'm trying to bring to you kind of what's happening in the States, a lot of the thinking going on here. I also do a big project on the future. For the last now, we're going to our third year, the future of the sharing economy with Airbnb, and I got a big project on the future of work with Intuit. So we're trying to think out what is going on here in a big picture way, and I want to share some of that with you folks today. This is actually we do all kinds of deep interviews with people all over about the thinking through where is the sharing economy going, where is this platform economy going, how do we actually rethink the whole system, as Esko has mentioned, around these things as we kind of move forward faster than anyone is aware of. And this is that cover story that McKeel talked about, smiling as you could see here, because actually the spirit of Wired in the 90s was that all these technologies are moving towards a better world, that there was a very positive, optimistic view of the future characterized by that piece right there. The problem is we got a huge transition, folks, to get over the hump here. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. Now, one way to do that is to think about, whoo, look at this thing. This is great. Esko kind of referred to it, but it's actually a really good point to think. We've been through many of these transformations before, and there's a pattern here. When you introduce a fundamentally new technology like we did, let's say, around 1800, there was a lot of new technologies around agriculture, completely disrupted. It's particularly in the United States, a kind of a slave economy around agriculture. The economy morphs around it, the future work, how we do work around it, morphs around it, and so the society has to adapt around it. The system has to adapt. Same thing happened, boom, when we actually started getting steam engines and trains and around steam. Different technologies, different ways of doing it. We had to reorganize. And again, I'm using dates that are map on more specifically the United States, but it's roughly analogous to what was happening in Europe here. Whole system changes had to happen in the late 19th century to kind of work around that. And then we kind of had the whole world around electricity and a whole kind of urban concentration that happened in the early 20th century. Again, fundamentally rethinking the rules, the safety nets, the kind of how long we work, how much we get paid, all that kind of stuff that Esko is referring to. And then we had another one after the war, happening in Europe, happening here, based around new technologies, internal combustion engine, other things like that. But we essentially reorganized our cities, reorganized the way we did jobs, the way we ran our economy, all this stuff. And now we're in another one of those now. And it really is a fundamental rework here. And we're really in the early stage of this, folks. A lot to come here. The biggest way to think about this, and this is what people in 100 years or 500 years from now, they're going to look back in the early 21st century and they're going to say, wow, the world went to a world historical shift to digital technologies, interconnected computers, a fully interconnected planetary scale kind of organization of the planet, and ultimately it's got to be sustainable in the light of climate change. And when you go through those kind of shifts, folks, everything's got to change in a really pretty core fundamental way. And we're just starting to wrap our heads around that. This is the thing about the digital world that we kind of forget. It's only roughly 20 years ago when we're at Wired, we're trying to explain the web to people and email and all that kind of stuff. There's been two booms here it's worth thinking about. When this boom, before the kind of internet started, only 6% of the world's data was digital. Boom, after the kind of low bandwidth boom, high bandwidth boom, we've now got all the world's digital. And this is where the big data phenoms started coming in here. 20 years ago, just think about that. Then also, you know, here's the market cap of Apple. It was only in 2005 where it started kicking up to now become the most valuable company in the world. Long time out there. This is, again, just a reminder, turn of the century. Just a little over 15 years ago. These were the most valuable companies in the world based on kind of US stock market price, market cap. It's pretty much the 20th century phenom, you know, a manufacturing company, oil company, financial services, retailer, and one tech company coming off the great boom. 5 years later, boom, pretty much the same, mixed it up a little bit differently. 5 years later, 2011, Apple replaces as the one technology company replaces Microsoft. Pretty much oil. Remember, we forgot about that kind of oil, tightened oil prices drove these very valuable companies there. Boom, what happens 5 years later? All 5 of the biggest, the most valuable companies in the world now are tech companies, all on the west coast of the United States, 3 of them in Silicon Valley. And these are just starting. As Esco mentioned, this happens frequently when you see these things, but boy, these things are just starting to take off. What is it about those things? They're all platforms. Platforms. And that I think hasn't really, I mean, even though a lot of people are tech savvy, I think we haven't really thought through the implications of what a platform is and how incredibly powerful they can become very quickly because of the network effect. Basically, platforms, the value of platforms is that everybody can benefit from a platform, so there's a lot of incentives for everybody to kind of tap into them. The other thing is once you start a kind of critical mass of people on a platform, there's huge incentives to actually for everyone to get on that platform, and that's exactly what we've seen. On the other hand, there's very positive things you can do off platforms. You can basically reorganize everything in very different ways off platforms, which is why these things have become so valuable so quickly. The other thing quickly to kind of show is how global this thing goes. I mean, this is the entire population of the United States, and basically, you know, unique users to Facebook and Google, for example, are now getting close to 2 billion people on the planet. You know, there's only 7.5 billion people on the planet. So these things are well beyond now kind of national borders. They're out of essentially anyone's control, and of course, Europe's trying to wrestle with how the hell do you deal with these kind of things. But here's the other thing. It's only 10 years ago, and this is actually, I got to give Friedman credit for this. It was only 10 years ago that not just the iPhone was introduced, so we all kind of refer to that, but Android, e-books, Facebook really kind of went beyond college. Twitter takes off and Airbnb was born. That's why I'm going to talk a little bit about the sharing economy and why that phenom happened. But the thing is, again, 10 years, folks. Historically, it's a blink of an eye. And that's why the shock of kind of how the system, how do we adapt, is only just starting to sink in really right now. The other driver that's driving this whole thing is economics, beyond this technology kind of provision here. And there's a quick couple things here I think we want to talk about. This is, again, using US kind of productivity measures, but essentially it's the same all over the Western world. Basically, what happened in the right at 1980, this is the Thatcher-Reagan kind of moment here, but basically we restructured how the economy worked, and we essentially forked off productivity gains went essentially to capital, and workers basically increasingly lost touch with essentially sharing the spoils of what was happening in the economy. This in the United States shows the percentage of what part of the economy is owned by the upper 1%. We basically went through a dive in the post-war world, and it actually is now back. Esco made the same point. This is the Henry Ford era. The big kind of tech companies at that time, like autos and that, boom, went huge kind of profits. And basically now we got it in the tech world right there. What drove it down, though? Just social policy. This is essentially the tax rate in the upper 1% in the United States as high as 91% in the 50s, which drove down that inequality and actually redistributed the wealth. Look for this to happen again. All over the world, I think we're going to see something very similar to that. Other things start happening which are really interesting here is the independent work phenomena. Basically, a third of all Americans now are independent contractors. Not with a job, they're free. A lot of the high-end folks, high-end contract workers are super sought after and make great livings, but also don't take a regular paycheck. ESCO's probably a contractor. There's a lot of high-end contractors, but there's also gig economy folks and also temp workers that are really struggling. Basically, the same amount of people in the United States are basically taking multiple paychecks. It's kind of a similar way to look at the same data. Europe is fast, kind of in a little bit different phenomena, but it is about 30% of Europeans now, partly because of your labor laws make it hard, so companies work around it with contracting and that. But we're starting to see a very significant reworking of the economy at its core level between who makes money and how. Now, brings in the sharing economy. So sharing economy happens right around 2008. Pressures of the new technology and also this economic pressures. What happened? In fact, I just did it. I came into Brussels airport and I stood in a taxi line with about 400 people waiting for at the choke point, a centralized choke point, waiting for the taxis to come, waiting for the taxis to come. Well, why not, when you have these powerful computers all connected with high bandwidth, we could totally reorganize transportation, which is in fact what's happened with kind of Uber and what have you. There's still the laws trying to kind of choke it back, but it's essentially reorganized that way. Same thing with Airbnb. It was impossible to organize all the bedrooms and empty homes in the world in any kind of efficient manner. You had to centralize it in one damn hotel downtown where everyone knew the rooms were. And so this really blew open, the technology blew open this new way of doing things into sharing. And when I say sharing, people say, well, it's not like sharing for free, but it's sharing underutilized assets. That's what a sharing economy is. Take an underutilized asset. Esco mentioned it. Everybody here who has a car, literally 95% of the time, that thing does absolutely nothing for you. And so the Uber driver says, I'm already paying car payments on this thing. Why don't I use it to actually make some extra money here? And the person who's already paying their mortgage, they're paying their rent, says, hey, I got an extra bedroom here. Why don't I actually make money on this? And so it's essentially a phenom that essentially is, in those two ways, it's well known. But it's actually blowing up in all kinds of different places now. All over, literally, there's people sharing pets now in the United States. You can rent a pet or kind of share your pet. And so the phenom was so compelling that here's the kind of growth stats for Airbnb. Just went from nothing to literally 200 million. Actually, they're about 250 million guests right now. They're basically in every country except North Korea, basically, right now. But it's not just them. It's also the same thing with Uber riders and stuff. I mean, it's just the same hockey stick has been happening in all these different things. Now, why is it so compelling? Well, on the guest side, it's driving prices down. People are like going, wow, it's opening it up for the grand tour for particularly young people. 60% of all folks using Airbnb are millennials. That's 35 and under. It's also happening all over the world. In fact, Europe, there's more Airbnb in Europe here than there is in the United States. It's not an American thing, actually. Also, women. This is astounding. Think about this. Every day, single women will basically walk down streets into neighborhoods they've never been into houses they've never been into, and be in a bedroom that they've never been into with a key that somebody else can come in any time, and they trust the system to actually stay in those houses. You talk about no trust going on. There's no trust in institutions, but there is an incredible trust going on between literally all those 200 million people have done that with Airbnb. There's something else, again, it's reputation systems, all the kind of things that kind of do that. It's also taking kind of, this is hotels in Paris here, and those are Airbnbs. Boom. It's just completely pushing out the ability to go any place, any neighborhood, everybody can, and actually there's rural examples of this where there's no hotels. Now people can visit in ways that they never could have even just, again, 10 years ago. For the people who are making the money, on the other side, the hosts, it's fascinating. The typical US host only does it 41 days a year, not 365 days a year. They do it enough that they keep 97% of the price. This is one thing that, it all goes to Airbnb. It doesn't. Airbnb keeps 3% of it, and ultimately, for the average person in the United States, it makes $6 grand, which for a lot of people struggling is a big, big hit, a big chunk. This is actually dollars. Sorry, that isn't euros. I didn't make the conversion there. But this is the fastest growing cohort of senior women. And actually, they're making more money on Airbnb than they're actually getting on their Social Security checks. But here's the thing on the future happiness, your happiness thing here, is that 82% of them report that Airbnb has helped them stay more socially and emotionally connected. Happiness. It isn't all about money. It's about connecting to people, seeing young people, different people from different cultures. That's what people love about this thing. And this is the thing that's funny about it, is Airbnb sees itself about its mission is not about, squeezing the juice out of all the money they can make. And again, I don't work for them. They're contracted with me. But I've watched this. They really think that they are knitting the world together into kind of connecting so anyone can belong anywhere on the planet. That's their kind of mission, and it actually kind of works in many respects. Now, there's issues, and we can get into that as well. But he wanted to talk about the long-term future of the sharing economy, so I'm going to talk about some long-term trends here that I think are worth pointing out. First is China. Again, every time we think about anything, I think about the future, you got to kind of wrap China into this. China in the sharing economy, first of all, China is, if you go one notch down, the top 10 most valuable companies in the world right now, 2 of them now are Chinese tech companies coming up. Alibaba and Tencent. They're getting close here, and they're playing in the gamers. But here's it, just from the sharing economy point of view, there's literally 600 million people were involved in the sharing economy in China. 600 million people. It's a huge phenomenon over there, and actually it's growing quite fast. China's this is actually in yuan, but actually $525 billion in sharing economy was just in the sharing economy portion of their economy. Again, about it doubled from the year before. They also, they're projected, they think, now I think could be one of those crazy projections. It's maybe not going to come true, but 2020, they think that it's going to be about 10% of GDP, by 2020, and as much as 20% by 2025. Why is that? And this gets into these other long-term trends, and they love sharing. Now, why is that? And it has to do with these other trends I'm going to point out to you. This is not the one for China, but there's another driver here. I'm going to talk to a couple other ones. Driver of sustainability. And this is, again, what Esko's mentioning, people are starting to get really worried about. We've hit, the last 16 years, hottest years on the planet. I don't have to kind of preach here, although in the United States, you still have to explain this stuff to people, or some people in the country. But it's getting to disaster proportions here very quickly here. And so, but there's a lot of unused, here's the United States, actually, unused housing units totally, and unused room all over the place. This is also not just a US thing. Here in Europe, folks, these are empty homes, just totally empty. Usually bought for assets or your guys' second homes or whatever it is. There's a lot of stuff just sitting there empty in a time when you actually need to kind of reuse what you got. So there's a big thing around sustainability. How are we going to reuse what we already have instead of building new infrastructure? Second thing is growth of cities. What's happening all over the world in terms of long-term trends here, this is the growth of global population. That's the kind of going to the cities. That's coming off the rural areas. We now have more people in cities than rural, and actually those trend lines are going to accelerate. So everybody's coming to the cities. What happens when everyone comes to cities? You got to start using stuff more efficiently. The assets you have, underutilized assets. Cities are exploding. Mega cities, of course, boom, right through the roof here from the early part of the century now, 100 years of that. So that's a chunk. So sustainability, cities burgeoning. Next era of tech, we mentioned it. I can't get too much into it, but the disruption of AI, automation, totally true, totally big deal that's happening here. One of the things, though, is the sharing economy is trying to emphasize connecting people and actually shifting it into what people can do. And I'll give you one example of this that's interesting about Airbnb. Airbnb is not just they're now moving into having people who have underutilized talents, like, hey, I know how to surf, or I know what to do with a samurai sword. They're actually letting people sell these services off the platform. And so they're connecting people all over the world into these experiences, they call. So when you go to the town, it's not just, hey, you use their place, but you can actually try out all this stuff. Now you can say, okay, it's trying to make more money, but actually it's connecting people to things that no robot's going to teach you that. No robot's going to teach you that. This is a kind of a platform of the kind of human thing that I think more humans will actually be doing and making livings on. And they're exploding all over the place now, just through the Airbnb kind of deal here. Now, the other mega trend that's happening here is the millennial generation is coming. Age 36 to 18, they are all coming, just as kind of famous ones in the United States, just to kind of tee up the kind of folks we're talking about here. They're not kids anymore, folks. They are the guts of what's going on here. Globally, this is the entire population of the planet by age, and this is kind of what runs the economy. This is the millennial generation, right? And there's a lot of boomers in this room. They're sliding off here, folks. And I'm a late boomer here myself, actually. But this is driving the global economy. Everyone's in the workforce now. Everybody's able to vote, age. If you push it out 25, to 2025, essentially, the boomers are gone, and basically the millennials are running everything. And so the thing about this is globally, 2025, the key demographic of everyone you're going to be selling to is here, and half the voters in the democracies will be like that. And what do? They value experiences over ownership. Totally clear. They're not wanting their McMansion in the suburbs. They want to actually be living in urban centers, experiencing things. They're paying for experiences. The other thing to just kind of remind us here is they're just revving up here. The millennials' childhood was here. Boom. They're the young adults that are restructuring how young adulthood is being done now, flowing back to the cities, changing the nature of work. We got them. They're going to redo the same thing about families. They'll probably get 20 more years of life because they're going to have genetics, biotech, all the medical devices you can expect this century. They're going to basically drive everything for the rest of the century. So whatever you do, listen to millennials. They're going to be running whatever they want to do is what we're going to do. Now, so this gets back to our idea of this time of reinvention. Big trends, big changes in the technology, the economy, the demographics, all the stuff I'm laying out here, long-term trends. Yes, it's about the sharing economy, but it's bigger. It's a way bigger thing that's going on here, folks. I think the West, basically the world is at a juncture right now. I mean, you got Brexit on this side, we got Trump on our side, we've got all these kind of issues. The world does not know what to do here. But I'm an optimist, and I think there's some interesting things to say here. What you're seeing with Trump, my own kind of way of this, is just the backlight. It's the last gasp of that thing trying to hold on. It's the last cry of pain and trying to go backwards into the 20th century. That world is gone. It's over. It's not happening. And America is rebooting around this temporary kind of backlash, I would say. But what is going forward is it's not clear, it's not old style, in our case, democratic politics, or old style kind of democratic politics here. I think there's something new happening. And again, I'm biased, I'm in California, but I just did a big TED Talk on California's future. It was a totally different talk, and I don't have the time to really go it. But I think there's something happening on the West Coast of the United States that people should tune into, not just technologically and economically, but also politically. This whole coast now is, like I just showed you, the powerhouses of technology. This economy is absolutely on fire. It's on fire. It's pushing money through all sectors of society. The housing problems and the homeless problems are only because there's so many people going into there that it's just displacing people. But this is a vital region, and it's got a new kind of politics. It's blue politics in the terms of the United States, democratic politics. It is totally the opposite of Trump. And I'm predicting in the next 10 to 15 years that you're going to see it kind of take over the whole United States kind of politics. I'm actually thinking we're watching the end of a kind of a last gasp of that kind of 80s conservative reactionary politics thing that we basically saw that led to those divisions of wealth and emphasis capital over labor and all that. I think we're moving into another period here, kind of what we saw after the post-war world of essentially a fundamental reworking of the whole economy and how it works around these new technologies and around a different way of distributing wealth and all kinds of things. And I think it's the closest thing to what's going on here. This is the big idea, and we don't have enough time to go into it. Think about it. It's closer to what happened in the Enlightenment. It's closer to that. And last time you guys recorded the Enlightenment, we had a little minor role over there trying to help invent representative democracy. If I had to say, and I don't want to get too into your stuff here, but from my point of view, what was going on at ground zero there was London, could have been Paris, could have been other places here. But at its core, you guys invented financial capitalism, representative democracy, carbon energies, the early industrial revolution. It's the thing we're still on a civilizational level, still basically grappling with today. I'm thinking if you're going to look for what's the new thing coming, I'm biased, but I would say look to San Francisco, the Bay Area right now. I think there's going to be a new kind of way of working capitalism, some kind of new way of democracy outside of representative, totally new renewable energy kind of thing. Biotech is just on the horizon. We're going to have to rethink that whole thing. It's not just that place. It's happening in urban centers all over the United States, happening all over Europe here as well, around the world. But we're in essentially about a 50 to 75 year, or 50 at least year build of basically what people are going to look back on as a different civilization. I think in 10, 50, 100, 500 years from now, people are going to say, wow, that, in the early 21st century, that's when the world went digital, that's when the world went global, that's when the world went sustainable. And that's when those folks back then built essentially a foundation for a new civilization that they'll still be probably booted on in 100 to 500 years' time. And with that, I'm going to say, let's have a good conference there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I have a couple of questions before we go into the coffee break. So, are we heading to a secession of California? So the CalCit. So is California seceding from the federation, like so many, like Britain or Catalonia now? I don't.
There is a current of, there's talk of, some people talk about that, but I think no. I think there's a longer story here, which I've just done a series on Medium, and I've also did a TED Talk on this. California has prefigured American politics by 15 years consistently for the entire modern political history.
So what happens in California?
So what happens in California happens in a kind of delay across, it happened with Reagan, it happened with the conservative backlash, all the pioneering stuff happens in California. It's just where all the innovators go. And whether it's right or left, it starts in California. And I'm saying what's happening on that West Coast is already in motion. It's already happening in all these urban centers through the United States. But I'm thinking much faster than people think. You're going to watch the politics of California become the politics of America in a pretty fundamental way. And it goes against what people think is going on in the country, but
interesting.
Listen.
So another question about the message here. So what's your message if you're in selling stuff, in producing cars or producing tools, or what's the message here? Should you stop producing them and going into services, or the sharing model, or trying to establish a platform?
Well, yeah, I think there's a bunch of ways to think about it. Take the sharing economy model. I think there's something to it. But basically, if you're producing things, produce those things to be shared by dozens, if not hundreds of people.
But then you sell less things.
Totally, but it could be super high quality. It could be baked. It's just like that Tesla updated every freaking, 6 months or something. There's going to be a way to make money. I mean, Esko is kind of alluding to the same thing. It's just, it's hard to imagine how everyone's going to make money in this next thing, but it's going to happen in the same, just like all these other junctures. Hey.
So why are you so optimistic? So you're suggesting there's a new long boom, but I mean,
here's my thing: is
where do you get
unlike
your optimism?
Wall Street? This is my own peer. I think these tech companies. And again, I'm kind of absorbing what's happening in the Valley right now. Tech does not want to be the bad guys in this. Tech wants. I mean, there's a ton of visionary, idealistic folks running those companies, and they don't want to be the guys that are screwing the juice out of everybody. And
so you trust them?
I actually do trust them. I spend a lot of time with them. I've spent a lot of time with people at the various highest levels, all those major companies. I know a lot of people in there. They really want to do the right thing, honestly. And I think they're willing to make some very magnanimous gestures. I think they certainly are not going to fight it the way I think Wall Street or the oil companies or others have fought kind of fundamental reform. And I think what you're seeing in California now is, progressive taxation coming back. They're opening up much more taxation on the wealth. They're moving wealth back in. They're reinvesting in the states. They're putting money back into public education. All that backlash of anti-tax squeeze the juice out of everybody. That's not the West Coast way right now. And I think tech is really leading with that, not only in their companies want to do it, but the philanthropies and the people that are spawning off that. I think there's a lot of things. And now, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, and I'm sure we're going to sit here with others, we could debate that. But I think there's a moment here, interestingly, I really do think there's something fundamentally different is going to happen here in the next 5 years here. And I think tech is not going to want to be the bad guy in this. They're going to want to show some leadership. Okay, it just happens so fast, folks. You cut them some slack here. They were just goofy little startups a dozen years ago. And now they're like, whoa, these global planetary things. So
you will be back later on at the end of the day to have a discussion, because I'm sure that some people will have questions about this optimism. But for now, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay.